Hello there. Today I'm going to share some of the stories in my new book, Not Playing by the Rules. Can you believe there was once a time when women weren't allowed to compete in marathons or wear bathing suits in public? And that for some women, playing musical chairs and drop the handkerchief were the only sports available to them at colleges? Well, neither could I until I began researching the history of women in sports. My very first picture book was the story of the Negro League pitcher, Satchel Paige. And that was followed by a fascinating story of the turn of the century cyclist, Major Taylor, champion cyclist. Then I wrote the story of young Pele, soccer's first star. But then I realized that while I was doing all this research about the lives of male athletes, I wasn't reading much about female athletes. Now, I'm originally from Malden, Massachusetts, and for me, one of the most interesting facts about my hometown is that it's also the hometown of a woman named Louise Stokes, who was nicknamed the Malden Meteor. Louise Stokes was born in Malden in 1913, and she went on to become one of the very first African American women to qualify for the Olympics in 1932. She was scheduled to run the 4x100 relay. However, due to discrimination, at the very last moment, she was substituted out for another athlete, and she wasn't allowed to compete. So I began the story of Not Playing by the Rules by doing research and thinking that I was going to be writing the story of Louise Stokes. But the more research that I did, I started reading stories about other really amazing, incredible women who faced obstacles in sports and had to overcome stereotypes and insults and discrimination just for the chance to compete in the sports that they loved. They were told no. They were told they should be more ladylike. They were told girls don't do that. They were told girls can't do that. They were told to slow down. They were told no over and over again. But the one thing they all had in common was that they never listened when they were told what they couldn't or shouldn't do, and they learned to play by their own rules. So now I'm going to read a few of the stories from Not Playing by the Rules, 21 female athletes who changed sports. So we're going to start right at the beginning with the story of Constance Appleby. And she is representing the sport of field hockey. So you can get a good picture of that. So Constance was born June 4th, 1873, and she died on January 26, 1981. Here is the story of Constance Appleby. When Constance Appleby booked round-trip passage from England to America in 1901 to take a summer course at Harvard University, she never imagined it would be decades before she used her return ticket. But then Constance, a graduate of the British College of Physical Education, discovered that musical chairs and drop the handkerchief were the main sports offered for female students at American colleges. She took a stand. "We play those games at parties," she told the hosts. "For exercise, we play hockey." Gathering up makeshift supplies and willing volunteers, Constance demonstrated the sport she played in her home country. One guest, Vassar Athletic Director Harriet Valentine, insisted she demonstrate the sport at her school. From 1901 to 1902, Constance traveled with her equipment from Vassar to Smith to Wellesley to Mount Holyoke to Radcliffe to Bryn Mawr to reach female college students and teach them the sport of field hockey and the importance of physical activity. With each school she visited, the popularity of field hockey began to spread to women on college campuses throughout the country. In 1904, she was hired to teach Bryn Mawr's first field hockey team. As a coach, Constance demanded that her players exercise daily. Those who missed practice were required to pay a fine, which helped cover the cost of equipment. and she often shouted her signature insult from the sidelines. "Put your claws on your stick, you one-legged turnip." Instead of rebelling, her players adored her and insisted her methods made them stronger women. And it was Constance's hope that their newfound strength in sports would translate into strength in fighting for women's rights and in the voting booth. In the 1920s, she founded The Sportswoman, the first magazine devoted entirely to women's athletics, and opened a field hockey camp in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, serving 1,000 girls taught by the best players and coaches from around the world. She retired from coaching in 1929, but continued to advise teams and coach her players informally, playing on the fields until she was 97 years old. Here is Constance again. Being a member of a team gives you confidence and power. This is the breath of life. Okay, now I'm going to read you another. This is the story of Bobbi Gibb, marathon runner, born November 2nd, 1942. Here we have Bobbi Gibb. Her first running partners were dogs. The neighborhood dogs kept pace with Bobbi as she made her way through the woods of Winchester, Massachusetts. Each morning she laced up white leather Red Cross nursing shoes, the only sturdy shoes available for women in the 1960s, and set out. She knew of no other runners and had never seen a track meet, let alone a marathon. But she knew that by herself, outside in the elements, nothing made her quite as happy as running. After her father took her to see the Boston Marathon, Bobbi, who could log nearly 40 miles in one stretch, started thinking about racing. 2 years later, from her new home in San Diego, California, she requested an application to compete in the 1966 Boston Marathon. A letter from race officials informed her that women were allowed to run only 1.5 miles competitively, and furthermore, they were physically incapable of completing a 26.2-mile marathon. That was when Bobbi made up her mind. She traveled 4 days aboard a bus headed for Massachusetts. On the morning of the race, Bobbi pulled on a one-piece swimsuit, her brother's Bermuda shorts, a pair of boys' running shoes, and a hooded sweatshirt, and made her way to the starting line of the marathon. Patiently, Bobbi waited behind bushes until she heard the starting gun, and waited some more until half the pack had passed. And then she jumped in. She was the only runner without a number pinned to her sweatshirt. Several miles in, the runners behind her began to whisper, and she knew they suspected she was a woman. She took off her hood, then peeled off her sweatshirt, down to her swimsuit, revealing her figure to the crowd of spectators. Reporters snapped photos, and word quickly spread throughout the racecourse that a woman was running. By the time she reached the halfway point at Wellesley College, a swell of female students was waiting to cheer her on. She was dehydrated and her feet were blistered, but she kept running. I knew that I was running for much more than my own personal challenge. I was running to change the way people think. Even with her late start, Bobbi finished with a time of 3 hours, 21 minutes, and 40 seconds, in 126th place, ahead of 2/3 of the runners. Here again is Bobbi Gibb. I was running to set women free. Now I'm going to read another. This is Alice Coachman, track and field, November 9th, 1923 through July 14th, 2014. Here is Alice Coachman. No one could catch her, not her brothers, not the neighborhood kids, no one. Her daddy told her to slow down, to act more ladylike, but Alice Coachman didn't listen to her daddy or to anyone else who told her that being a girl meant she couldn't play baseball and softball or run like the wind, barefoot down the red dirt roads of Albany, Georgia. When she wasn't allowed to practice her high jumping on the athletic fields with white people, Alice made her own bar by stringing together rags and attaching them to bamboo fishing poles. Fred and Evelyn Coachman had 10 children, and they didn't have time for a daughter who misbehaved, danced, and played sports when there was work to be done. But a teacher and an aunt, who both knew of Alice's talent for sports, told her to keep right on competing. Alice showed everyone on her high school track and field team that you didn't need shoes to break records when she earned herself a full scholarship to Tuskegee Institute. But free tuition meant that when Alice wasn't practicing, studying, or winning national championships in the 100-meter dash, 4x100 relay, and high jump, she had to earn her keep by maintaining the tennis courts, sewing football uniforms, and cleaning the gym. Alice was ready to go to the Olympics in 1940, but because of World War II, the Olympics were canceled. Alice was ready to go to the Olympics in 1944, but again, because of the war, the Olympics were canceled. In 1948, on a rainy August afternoon in London's Wembley Stadium, Alice cleared 5 feet 6 1/8 inches and won the Olympic gold medal in the high jump, beating out Great Britain's Dorothy Tyler. She was 24 years old, nearly 6 years older than most of her competitors. When Alice sailed over the bar, she became the first African-American woman to win an Olympic gold medal. But when she returned home to Albany, Georgia for a hero's reception, the local auditorium was segregated. The mayor refused to shake her hand, and she had to exit from the side door. Still, Alice remained positive. We had segregation, but it wasn't any problem for me because I had won. I've always believed I could do whatever I set my mind to. And we have one last one that I'd like to read. That is Tatyana McFadden, track and field, born April 21st, 1989. Here is Tatyana McFadden. Nothing could slow down 6-year-old Tatyana, not even spina bifida, a condition from birth that paralyzed her legs. When her Russian orphanage couldn't afford a wheelchair, Tatyana used only her hands to speedwalk across the floors. On a trip to the orphanage, Deborah McFadden, visiting for her work with the U.S. Health Department, immediately noticed the bright-eyed bundle of energy. "That's my mom," Tatyana told the orphanage director. When the two returned to Baltimore, Maryland, as mother and daughter, doctors informed Deborah that Tatyana, who was underfed and had received no medical care in the orphanage, likely wouldn't survive. Deborah responded by contacting Jerry Herman, a coach, trainer, and advocate at the Kennedy Krieger Institute, who worked with children with disabilities to help Tatyana build her strength with swimming, gymnastics, and even scuba diving. Deborah didn't speak much Russian, but she quickly learned Tatyana's favorite phrase, "Я сама." I can do it myself. Tatyana grew stronger each year. At age 8, she was fitted with a racing wheelchair. At 9, she decided she wanted to become a professional athlete. At 15 years old, she became the youngest athlete in the Summer Paralympics in Athens, Greece. She returned home with a silver medal in the 100-meter and a bronze in the 200. But back at her high school, Tatyana's track team refused to let her race alongside able-bodied racers, requiring Tatyana to circle the track by herself, a lone blur in her wheelchair. When her coach at the University of Illinois, also a wheelchair racer, suggested she try longer distances, Tatyana agreed to enter the Chicago Marathon in 2009. After winning, she was asked by reporters how a sprinter became a marathoner. And Tatyana replied, "Well, I just love doing the 400 meters, so I told myself I was just doing it 100 times." In 2013, she added wins in the Boston, London, and New York City marathons to become the only person to win every major marathon in the same year, setting new course records in 2 of them. She won all 4 again in the next 3 years. Tatyana inspired a nation of athletes, including her adopted younger sisters, Ruthie and Hannah, both of whom have disabilities. Hannah competed alongside her sister at the 2012 Paralympics. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the stories. And I hope you'll have the opportunity to read many of the other stories featured in Not Playing by the Rules. And those stories include the stories of Lizzie Arlington from baseball, Athelda Bleibtree, swimming, Babe Diedrichson for golf, Joy Johnson, marathon runner, Althea Gibson, tennis, Flo Hyman in volleyball, Nancy Lieberman, basketball, Nadia Comaneci, gymnastics, Diana Golden in skiing, Mia Hamm, soccer, Lisa Leslie for basketball, Venus and Serena Williams for tennis, Ibtihaj Muhammad, fencing, Gabby Douglas for gymnastics, Yusra Mardini for swimming, and Monet Davis in baseball. Thanks again for joining me. Enjoy. Bye-bye.